Welcome to the Put You On Game podcast. We're your hosts, Soji and Jared. Thank you so much for joining us on whatever audio streaming platform you happen to be joining us on. We are everywhere. And if you want to watch this podcast, you can catch us on YouTube and wherever you are watching or streaming or listening. Please make sure to give us a like, a share, a subscribe, or rate us 5 stars. We really appreciate it. Every little bit helps. Without further ado, let's start the show. Suji, my guy, what's going on, bro?
What's up, Jared? Jarman in the building. Glad to be here. How you doing, bro? I'm straight. I'm straight.
I'm good, man. Got my vaccine yesterday, as my big bro
Nice.
would say. Get jook up so we could hook up, man. Be responsible.
Okay, I see you
All right,
doing
let's
your thing,
get
man.
the
Let's get the show
we
on the
trying we
road.
trying out here, man. Trying to live our lives or get back to living our lives.
Yeah.
And let's get started with our show, man. We got a really interesting set of topics for you guys today. First up on deck, ESPN dropped their list of their top 25 players under the age of 25. And this list is based not on players in their current standing, but on their future potential. And on that list, we have Luka Doncic coming up at number one, followed by Zion Williamson, LaMelo Ball, Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, De'Aaron Fox, Ben Simmons, and Devin Booker. And there's some other notable players on the list, including Jamal Murray, John Morant, Trae Young, and Tyrese Halliburton in varying orders. So I just want to get your take on the list. And as far as the rankings go, did they get it right, or are there some squabbles you have with it?
So I think for the most part they got it right, but I'm actually very annoyed with the list. It's another example of, ESPN just looking down on my Knicks, saying you guys don't matter, you guys don't have talent, you guys can't even, scrape together a good playoff run season. And it's like, why are you guys hating? Isn't their headquarters in New York or Connecticut? Close enough, like we should get some tri-state love. They got my man Michael Bridges, Domantas Sabonis, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton above RJ Barrett, the number 3 pick last year, and a guy who's statistically across the board has improved, and he's just completely left off. Yeah, I get it's future projections, but at the same time, this man has shown an ability to learn from his mistakes and has gotten better in every statistical category from year 1 to year 2. And he's been completely snubbed. And he's like 20. And it's like, if this is about future projections, you really think Michael Bridges is going to be the next Kawhi Leonard or something like that? You think Domantas Sabonis is going to suddenly at some point become better than what he already is? He's a great player, but I think we've kind of seen his ceiling as a post up rebounding, four that can kind of stretch, but not really. And Anthony Edwards is just a bowling ball, barreling down the court, who's slightly better in shooting. I could get into everything and really break it down, but overall, I'm just a little annoyed that my man RJ didn't get on the list, but that's okay. We will, he's going to use it as continued fuel. He didn't make the rookie team, either the rookie teams last year. He didn't make this arbitrary list this year. And if history serves correct, he's going to take that as fuel and motivation to get better and better. And next year, he's coming. Best believe. The other issue I had with this, not really an issue, is more of annoyance because my Knicks had the chance to draft several players on this list. Like I remember when we drafted Kevin Knox, it's like, okay, a guard from, a wing from Kentucky who has some potential to really do something special. And we passed on both Michael Bridges and Miles Bridges, who are both better this year than Kevin Knox. And not just are they better, but Michael Bridges actually made number 17 on this list, which kind of, yeah, it's endlessly infuriating to see that while Kevin Knox is riding the Tom Thibodeau bench in the doghouse. And there's definitely some controversy in the top 3 of this list, but I'm gonna leave that to you.
Okay. That is the most blue and orange take I have seen on this list since I've been following the story. That was a very Knicks tinged take, but I definitely did notice RJ's omission. I think he does rank ahead of some of these players on this list, particularly like you said. I think there's guys like Edwards and Halliburton that you can't entirely be convinced that they're like head and shoulders above RJ. I think
Right.
Sabonis has shown that he is, an all-star. So him already being an all-star, if you rank RJ ahead of him, that kind of suggests that you believe that RJ will be a multiple-time all-star, which for me is up in the air. I would bet on it. Like if I had to put money on it, I would say that RJ was going to be an all-star and a multiple-time all-star at some point in his career. But I don't have an issue with Sabonis being ahead of him. And I think with Mikal Bridges, I think it's more so about the team he plays for as well, because Phoenix is in contention right now for the first seed in the West, and he's a important part of their team. So I think they
All
see
due to Chris Paul, by the way. All due to Chris Paul. The Chris Paul effect is real. We'll see what his career goes after Chris Paul leaves.
It is, but his importance to that team can't be understated, because you do have a scoring guard in Devin Booker, and you do have the ultimate table setter and point guard and professional in Chris Paul, but you need guys that surround those two players with that have the qualities that Mikal Bridges has. And but yeah, I do think that RJ being left off the list is egregious, but I don't think that it's the most egregious thing on this list by any stretch of the imagination. And for me, that's the LaMelo Ball ranking. I want to preface this by saying that I like LaMelo Ball a lot. I think he's one of the most exciting players in the league already in terms of his ability to pass the ball. And he's also shown that the weaknesses that he displayed during his time as a professional in Australia that he's really worked on. His shot mechanics are a lot more stable. He's hitting the three-pointer at a way higher rate than anyone thought he would this early in his career. He's one of the league leaders, I believe, in deflections also. So it shows that he's actually competing on the defensive end, even if he is making rookie mistakes. But I say he's also a generational passer. He's one of the best passers in the league already because of the fact that he can make so many different kinds of passes that no one else can make. But I do think that it's a little premature, because with rookies, they often have stretches of really good NBA play, but as the season wears on, or as defenses adjust to them, or as the scouting report gets out on them, their performances can taper off. So it's a little premature for me for them to put him on this list so early when we don't know what he's going to look like over the full course of a couple seasons. I think it's fine to rank him in the top 10, but I don't like the idea of ranking him over a Jason Tatum, who's an elite scorer and an elite two-way player in the league, or a Devin Booker, who is a 20 plus point per game scorer on a winning team. And I just don't think that he's necessarily going to be definitively better than those guys, or you can say that at this moment. Even a De'Aaron Fox is having an amazing season. He's putting up, I think, like 25 and 7.
Yeah.
And he's had elite production because he plays for Sacramento. He's not getting the love that he deserves, but I just think that LaMelo's ranking is a little bit premature to put him behind a guy like Luka Doncic, who is one of the best players in the league and who could go down as one of the best players that we've ever seen, and Zion Williamson, who we've discussed on past podcasts, who is
young Mac Truck, by the way.
Young Mac Truck, who's a dominant force on the inside and is currently been putting up, I think, like 30-something points a game for the last month. So I think it's just a little bit premature on LaMelo. Not saying he won't be on that level, because he definitely has a chance to be, but I just think it's a little bit early on the ranking because he is. And I think it's also, I think with ESPN, you also got to be aware of the whole clickbait factor.
Yeah.
Every year they come out with these rankings, and there's always outrage because they know what they're doing. They know that if they put one player a little bit too high or too low, that they're going to get fans and observers in, a bit of a tizzy. Like Zach LaVine was ranked below Lonzo Ball at the beginning of the season. So I mean that's kind of what is a good indicator of the kind of motivation ESPN has when they post these lists. But what do you think about LaMelo and the rankings overall?
LaMelo, I think they're trying to really extrapolate future potential. And I think they see LaMelo as this kind of game-changing presence on the court who can impact the game on a level of a Luka. They see his adaptation to the NBA game, NBA speed, and his progression from Charlotte trying to kind of almost take their time with him, keep him off the bench to the point where his talent was so good and his production was so good that they literally could not keep him on the bench. They had to have him as a starter. And his ability to create, his ability to shoot, his ability to finish, showing all the, more tools than Lonzo at his age. And they're like, hey, we have to project in the future. He's 19. Luke was 19 in his rookie season and was doing things that were, you really didn't see from a 19-year-old. So if we put him in that same category, we could see him being a perennial all-star. But big but to put him just 2 spots behind Luka and in front of guys who have shown playoff potential and greatness, and in a Jason Tatum, in a Donovan Mitchell,
Jaylen Brown is 12.
Yeah, I mean Jaylen Brown, I think that for some of these guys, I'm like, okay, I can see a clear ceiling. I can see that they are good, but I don't think that they're going to get that much better over the course of their careers.
I disagree on Jaylen Brown, though. He's putting up 24, 5, and 3, and he's an elite defender as well. And his handle has improved like incredibly. So I think that there's certain guys on these lists that are just a little bit too low. And I think ESPN for me, like it's almost like they're almost like a kid that like every time they get a new toy, they just put the other one down in the corner and it gathers dust. So it's like Zion was that toy for a while, and now it's LaMelo Ball. So it's like, and there's certain players that were a toy for a short time, but don't really get the push that some of these other players get. So if you look at like a Ja Morant, like he's 15 on this list. And who's to say that LaMelo Ball is definitively going to be a better player than Ja Morant is, or that he's going to be 12 spots better,
Yeah.
So
Ja Morant is an interesting case because especially watching him yesterday, I got the sense that he's a really great player, very great young player, but he does have shooting limitations, which I didn't realize. Were as bad as they are because Memphis doesn't get the kind of publicity that other teams get. I think he's shooting like 20-something% from 3 this year, but he is leading this Memphis Grizzlies team to a playoff run despite not having guys like Jaren Jackson. So yeah, it is kind of a spit in the face to say a guy who is as young as Ja Morant isn't getting as much love as a LaMelo Ball. And yeah, what do you think about guys like Trae Young and DeAndre Ayton and Colin Sexton and even Lonzo Ball making the list?
I think those spots are good for those particular players. Lonzo has shown a little bit more, so I think maybe you might be able to bump him up a couple spots. Trae is one of the most offensively talented players in the league, but he has his defensive struggle. So that might be part of the reasoning why he's so low. But, and like you said about ceilings, like I think that maybe the guys at ESPN may have doubts about his ceiling as a player, because we did see him average, I think, 29 and 9 last year, and the Hawks didn't really have too much success. And that's part of that's also because they're a rebuilding team, but maybe
Yeah.
they see a ceiling on his talent because in the playoffs, it might be hard for the Hawks to compete if he's going to be consistently hunted on the defensive end. So that
Yeah.
might be part of the reasoning. I think you could definitely make an argument for Trey moving up some. Uh, but yeah, I think overall it's a list that you could disagree with. Even a guy like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, I think that I don't think that you can necessarily say that uh, certain players that are higher than him are going to be definitively better than he is in the future
Mm.
because he's also still very young and he has so many great physical tools. So it's a list. So granted, with any list, there's going to be disagreements, especially
And
involved.
did
Go
you
ahead,
feel
sorry.
like anybody was snubbed in particular besides RJ?
Actually, I had RJ down as my snub.
Okay.
I did because he went from 14 points a game to 17 points a game, increased efficiency. His jump shot is getting better. He's playing for one of the best defensive teams in the league, so he's competing on that level as well. And he's playing for a team that's playing winning basketball, even if they don't have a winning record at the moment. But I think he's actually contributing to winning, playing huge minutes because he's playing for Tibbs. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that RJ was my main snub. As a Bulls fan, I can't consciously look at any guys on our roster and say that they warrant being on this list. Even Wendell, like, got traded, I can't say him. I can't say Lowry. I can't say Kobe. And with Pat, it's too early to tell. I could see Pat being a guy that's on this list maybe in year 2 or 3 because he is, I think, the second youngest player in the league. He doesn't turn 20 until next season. So he
Mm.
has 5 more years to be on a list like this.
Yeah.
But, I think you could potentially see him on this list. And Zach's a little bit too old. So just from that perspective, I don't see any guys, but RJ was my main snub.
Okay. Got you. Got you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But let's keep it moving, man.
Definitely.
Let's
Definitely.
stay let's stay basketball for a second because I wanted to talk about Draymond Green and his recent comments about the WNBA. And Draymond is obviously a very vocal player. He is not shy about saying what is on his mind at any given time, and that's something admirable about him. But for me, sometimes you can also get things wrong. And when you do get things wrong in this space, it's a very public wrong.
Mm.
But I want to get your thoughts on it after I give you the rundown. He basically said that WNBA players are too busy complaining about the wage gap to focus on growing the game. He wants the WNBA to tell individual stories like the NBA did with Magic and Bird and to focus on turning the WNBA into a global game through building a platform. He also wants the companies that lobby for women's empowerment in connection to the WNBA to accompany their moral support with more financial support and commit money to the WNBA cause. He then puts the onus on WNBA players, and his quote is, "I'm really tired of seeing them complain about the lack of pay because they're doing themselves a disservice by just complaining. They're not laying out steps that they can take to change that. It's coming off as a complaint because the people that can change it are just going to continue to say, well, the revenue isn't there. So if you don't bring in the revenue, we can't up your pay." They're going to keep using that, but the reality is, as true as that is, it's an excuse because everyone says we support women's empowerment. Everyone uses it to their advantage, yet these women are not using these people who are saying these very things to their advantage. So for context, the WNBA players get paid less than 80,000 on average, and this stat is from the 1920 season, while NBA players earned 7.4 million on average in the same period. WNBA players were paid about 20% of league revenue, and NBA players are paid a little bit more than 50% of league revenue. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what Draymond said and if you want to expand into the pay disparity as well.
So I think what Draymond said was quite interesting. I'd like to hear some opposing takes on the matter. maybe from WNBA players and executives who are, close to the ground on the issue. But ultimately, I understand where he's coming from, where he says, hey, the onus when it comes to pay, performance, and wanting a better lot, it comes down to the performers trying to put down a better product in order to attract more attention, attract more eyes, get people and fans more engaged in your product. And I think that there's an argument, a reasonable argument that he kind of laid out to say, hey, we the NBA didn't always have this kind of salary. The NBA had to grow. They had to uplift stars like Michael Jordan, like Larry Bird, like Magic Johnson, Dr. J in the past, to get to a point where they became a global sensation, up to the days of now LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. And that attention and the storylines and the drama is what drives the revenue. People wanting to watch them on TV is what drives the revenue. And so he's just saying, hey, like, if you're the WNBA, complaining is one thing, and you have a right to complain, I think, but also that those complaints have to be met with action, and you should leverage the support of the people who are your apparent champions and advocates. So I agree. I kind of agree with him on that. But I also I temper that with an understanding of I don't also know all the ins and outs of that, and as well as I don't know all the ins and outs of what makes the WNBA a profitable business. I remember hearing in the past that the NBA actually financially supports the WNBA, and a part of the NBA's revenue goes towards the WNBA and its funding. So I don't know if the WNBA is even a profitable and self-sustaining enterprise. And so it's really challenging for an institution like that to be able to kind of pick itself up from its bootstraps and put out a product if on its own it's not necessarily profitable. And so if you lose money on trying to facilitate the WNBA, it's really hard to justify saying, hey, we want a pay increase. And then the other issue is ultimately that pay disparity where WNBA players are getting 20% of the revenue is problematic in my opinion. It should be closer to a CBA that, the NBA has been able to negotiate where they get around 50%. So that should be the case. But otherwise, I think that this is a really interesting topic, and I'd like to hear more research to get more of a holistic understanding of the issue, as opposed to people trying to just champion the issue for social justice points in a way,
Yeah, I don't know. I fundamentally disagree with Draymond. I think that his heart is in the right place, but I think that he's ignoring misogyny entirely. I think that it doesn't really take too much to just like look at any post that the WNBA posts on social media or online. All you got to do is just go in the comments and you'll see dudes that have never touched a basketball in their life, like making kitchen jokes or saying, I would never watch this. Like, what are they doing? This is dumb. Like, there's so much hate, like on the front end, just from fans, that it is hard to get that investment if people are just not willing to watch the game because they're women. Like, if watching WNBA games, the skill level is the same and even higher in some cases. It's just that the flashy athletic plays aren't there because of biological differences. Like, there's not really much that they can do about that. So for me, it just kind of comes off as a little bit tone deaf, because he does have the access to the WNBA players in terms of knowing them and knowing some of them and being in that circle to actually ask these questions. Because to suggest that they haven't been doing the groundwork it's kind of silly to me.
Okay.
Because Like, why would they not? Why would they not do the groundwork? Like, for me, it kind of comes off like you don't think that they've thought about the exact things that you're saying. Like, I'm sure they've thought about it way more than you have, because they're actually in it. They're actually having to go play overseas during the off season to actually feed their families and support their their basketball lives. So
Right.
it just comes off a little bit like it comes from a place of privilege. And I don't think Draymond's a bad guy. I don't think he is a misogynist, but I think that his comments kind of come off a little bit on the ignorant side, because it kind of comes off like the argument of a white person talking to a person of color. Like, I did it. Why can't you? Like, I started my own company and now I make six figures. So why can't you do it? And
Mm,
it's ignoring a whole lot of factors that may impede that person from achieving the same things that you have achieved. And that factor is misogyny.
mm.
Like, there's just not that investment in the women's game. And it's not just the WNBA, it crosses all sports. Because if you want to look at the NCAA, uh the product for men's and women's basketball, the quality is inarguably the same. Women's college basketball is a great watch.
Yeah.
It's an excellent product. But if you look at the way that the women are treated, like, I don't know if you saw the stories with the differences in the weight rooms. The men had an entire decked out weight room that's, appropriate for college athletes, and the women were literally given a dumbbell rack, and
Wow.
that was it. Even down to the food was entirely different, the food that they were given. So, and the disparities between men and women are just so apparent, and it's certain things that the people that are in charge can choose to do in order to enforce and promote equality that they just don't do. You can look at women's soccer. The women's soccer team for the US Nationals has been more successful than the men
Yeah.
in the last couple uh Olympics and the last
Over
couple
the,
games.
yeah, over the
So
last like 20, 30 years.
yeah,
since
I
I've
was I
been,
wasn't even I wasn't even gonna go that far, but yeah, they
yeah,
have been way more successful, but they do
yeah.
not get paid the same, despite the fact that they are more successful. And I just don't I can't wrap my mind around that being anything else than you not wanting to treat women equally, you know?
Um, and I understand that point and I understand that sentiment. And I think that sometimes I think there is a level of misogyny in all of this, but I also think that there's a level of revenue as well as how revenue is distributed. I don't have all the numbers and stats in front of me, unfortunately, but I do understand that there is a difference in what um, which eyes are being brought to a sport, as well as who's purchasing tickets to see games, and all of those things that go into how revenue is ultimately distributed. And
Mhm.
um, I think what some people would make the argument for is that, oh, because we bring in X amount of dollars, we deserve X amount of revenue. Now, I don't know what that breakdown is for, soccer or even basketball, and how what the collective bargaining agreements are around that. But I do agree that, hey, if people are bringing in championships, if people are bringing fame and notoriety to a sport and they're being champions of the sport, they should be compensated well. And I do think that if you are if yeah so I ultimately agree with you, but I think that I just temper that to say, hey, there sometimes are reasons beyond misogyny that come into play when they're trying to divvy up the pie.
I get what you're saying. I just think that the reason for the pot being so small is misogyny. That's my argument. So the reason that there isn't as much of a pot to divide is because people aren't watching women's sports because it's being played by women. So
Mm,
I'm not saying that there's an easy fix there. I'm not saying that the WNBA and the players aren't doing everything that they can to try to remedy that or try to find a solution. It's just for me to say that they're not doing enough and to put the onus on them is what I have an issue with.
Mm.
So it is a problem. There is a disparity, and that disparity, because of how much men's sports make, will likely never come close to being equal. And I
Right.
understand the revenue aspect of that because the NBA makes so much money. So for them to get paid the exact same, like that doesn't necessarily work out or make sense financially. But we can't put that on the players. The players are doing everything that they can and pushing the game in every way that they can. It's just that they are not receiving the support of the general public because they are women.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. To some degree, at the end of the day, what Magic and Larry and Michael had to do was perform on the court. And it was the job of the media, the job of NBA executives, to promote access to the players, to promote storylines of the players. And it is the job of the media to bring light. And they are a filtering, the media is a filtering apparatus where they show you what's important. So if they push the WNBA and the NBA versus the NBA, they are ultimately in control of how much attention or how little attention a subject gets. And so there is onus on outside of what the players have to do. And I think you're right in some sense, like there needs to be more of an emphasis if we're going to really see some kind of change in that regard. And so, yeah, so it's not really fair to just put all the blame on the players, Yeah, I understand where
Right.
you're coming from in that regard.
Yeah, it's not an easy fix, and it's not an easy it's not a conversation that can really truly shed enough light on the problem within, an hour. But
Yeah.
it is something that needs to be addressed for sure. And hopefully this will spur on conversations where there are actual actionable points that can be taken by men and by women in order to help the women's game advance as much as the men's has, at least within that context. But let's switch gears for a little bit and talk about something else entirely. Let's talk about vaccines because it's something that's relevant to everyone in one way or another, whether you are getting vaccinated or you're not, it's a relevant subject. So I wanted to get your thoughts on vaccines and what they represent to all of us.
So, yeah, I wanted to talk about the vaccine from the standpoint of the numbers first. The numbers that I really found that were kind of shocking were the fact that African Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, as well as American indigenous populations are upwards of 90% more likely to die from the coronavirus. Up to 2 to 3 times more likely to be hospitalized, and at least 10%, 30%, and even 70% more likely than white Americans to get COVID to begin with. And then when you look at vaccines and vaccine distributions, this continues to frustrate me because when you look at who's being vaccinated, the numbers for those groups are kind of commensurate with who's actually getting vaccinated. So white Americans are getting vaccinated at a higher rate than all other ethnic groups, as well as I was able to look up the numbers for New York, and Asian Americans in New York have the highest, at least one dose of vaccine rate, followed by white Americans. Asian Americans are at 46%, white Americans, white New Yorkers at 38%, Latino New Yorkers at 25%, and Black New Yorkers are at 22%.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one part of the numbers, right? So that's the numbers. The reasons for this is what I wanted to get into with you, because I've thought there's a lot of people who are not really trying to get vaccinated, who are not really interested in the vaccinated, and there's a lot of hysteria around it. And I think that some of it comes from a historical context where, you have issues like the Tuskegee experiments, as well as other historical mistreatment of Blacks and ethnic groups in the US when it comes to healthcare, whether it's not women, especially. And then you look at things like um,
Like
the
the mortality
mortality.
rate for
Yeah,
pregnancy. Okay.
exactly, things of that nature. And so there's a historical distrust that ethnic groups, Black people in particular, have with the healthcare system and apparatus in the US. And then you look at housing infrastructure when it comes to COVID, um, and how for some ethnic groups, we are more likely to be bunched up in apartment buildings and in government sponsored housing, that and you have multiple generations of families living in 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments versus other ethnic groups who may have a house and may be easier to kind of socially distance from friends and family members.
Yeah, ups the
And
spread.
then
Yeah.
yeah, and then you also have other reasons for these disparities, which are pre-existing risk factors, which include obesity, hypertension, and diabetes, which, if an individual has those diseases, are more likely to die from COVID, or more likely to get sick with COVID, or severely ill with COVID. And so there's the numbers behind the vaccine, but then or there's the numbers behind COVID results and lack of vaccines and hysteria, but then there's also the reasons. I also wanted to get some of your take on what you think those reasons might be, as someone who's not necessarily in healthcare.
Uh, it's a complicated issue. I think there's so much current and historical context behind the things that you were talking about in terms of distrust of medicine, in terms of people of color in their communities. There's so many factors at play when it comes to that that are not advantageous to people of color getting the vaccine. And that obviously starts with a distrust of medical professionals, the government, and it's almost ingrained in our communities. So it can be difficult to overcome things like that. And then you also have the introduction of things like social media, which plays a huge role. I think that social media gives almost everyone that has access to the internet or a smartphone access to misinformation.
Mm.
And that, coupled with distrust, can it kind of concocts into this uh, potion, I guess you could say, that equals people being opposed to something that could potentially or should potentially help them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I've also seen, in it through social media, different posts and people spreading of information, whether it's through social media or even WhatsApp. These WhatsApp chain messages of people saying that the vaccine is bad. All you need is hydrochloroquine. All you need is this, that, and the third. And not to say that there isn't merit to some of what people are saying, or that there isn't reason to be distrustful or to take, information that you get from the government with a grain of salt. Ultimately, it's your job to not just try to prove your biases, but also disprove your biases and try to find the truth ultimately. And also, maybe a reliance on holistic medicine and alternative medicines to either treat yourself from COVID or to just treat yourself in general. But ultimately, you have to weigh out the pros and the cons and the consequences. Unfortunately, for Black people in America, we've seen a disproportionate, and other ethnic groups, a disproportionate amount of death and burden and disease from impact from COVID. I know people who have passed away. I have friends, family members, people in my extended family and community that have passed away, and it frustrates me because if there was a better distribution of information, as well as potential remedies to protecting yourself from COVID, I would have loved to have seen them receive that. I don't hear people talk too much about, diet and exercise being a real big factor, and not just diet. And I don't like to say diet. I like to say eating lifestyle, because
Hmm.
that has more of staying power. Diet is very fatty. You get on a diet, you get off a diet, but eating lifestyle seems to me more sustainable, and, just trying to instruct people on how to create a better type of eating lifestyle. Also, sleep becoming a big important factor in disease management. People aren't really getting enough sleep, and as well as vitamin D supplementation. As a remedy, I've discovered that there's a lot of burgeoning research saying that vitamin D supplementation is linked to better COVID-19 outcomes. And even there's some studies from the University of Chicago saying that people who have even higher levels of vitamin D in their blood system are statistically less, very, very statistically less likely to get sick from COVID-19. And as an African American person who has dark skin in the northern hemisphere, where you don't get as much sun exposure, your vitamin D levels are going to be lower. And this
Hmm.
vitamin D deficiency is, even though it might not present itself clinically, it leads you to be more susceptible to COVID-19 infections, and as well as to get sick and have more issues. I got COVID last year, and I was sick from it. And I would venture to say, because at that point in time, I wasn't supplementing with vitamin D, and it was March. And so I didn't get a lot of sun exposure. I could kind of see how I was at risk for even just getting sick and getting the virus. Um, and so I just wish more conversation like this would happen, so that people could get a little bit more comfortable. I've received both doses of the COVID vaccine. You said that you got your vaccine shot. What was your experience like with that?
Yeah, I got mine yesterday. It was pretty seamless, pretty easy. I don't have any symptoms. I have a little pain at the injection site, but that's natural because that happens with a lot of different vaccines. I hear people have, maybe some negative symptoms on the second one sometimes, but I mean, I'm not worried about it. For me, it's just the first step to getting back to really getting to live my life again,
Mm,
you know, because as someone that's been pretty cautious about COVID, it's been difficult to be boxed in essentially for a whole year and be restricted on what I can and can't do. And when I do go out, there is kind of a sense of anxiety uh, going out in public and being around large groups of people, even if I am wearing a mask. So it's gonna be good to kind of have that, a little bit of a monkey off my back. But overall, to answer your question, yeah, the experience was positive. I'm looking forward to getting the second dose and approaching the new normal.
yeah, I mean, and even with getting vaccinated, as well as the side effects of getting vaccinated, um, you know, the chances of someone dying from a vaccine versus the chances of someone dying from COVID, it's like the numbers are way less. And even myself, I've actually experienced some side effects from the vaccine. Chills, shortness of breath, again, pain, not shortness of breath, sorry, chills and fever overnight, as well as, pain at the injection site. But overall, I'm happy because I'm able to, it was like a weight that was lifted off my shoulders once I went through the full regimen. And, I could be a little bit more, I felt a little bit more comfortable to travel. I felt a little bit more comfortable to be around, family members, and to even have, gatherings of a small sort. And so it just kind of lifted a monkey off my shoulder, and I felt like I was able to get back to some level of normalcy, even though it's not complete. But ultimately, I feel like if we're serious about ending these disparities in COVID, in COVID infections, death, hospitalizations, and just impact, um, we should continue to at least champion vaccines, but and also champion better habits with people just taking care of themselves. Again, obesity, diabetes, hypertension are three of the biggest risk factors for complications of COVID. And those are three things that can be controlled by every individual, for the most part. And so, as long as I feel like if we can be a part of that solution in, kind of pushing that, I hope that we could just continue to spread goodwill and, progress to our brothers and sisters who are, being impacted by this.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with all of those things. And please make sure that I definitely do recommend that if you don't have any prior health issues or allergies to vaccines to go get vaccinated. But if you are on the fence, I would actually recommend please do your research, and not Facebook research, not random internet research. Please research accredited sources, listen to the medical professionals, and make your decision from there. Please don't find yourself a victim of misinformation and let that misinformation guide you towards extending your misery from COVID.
Mm. Well said, my brother. Well said.
Let's switch gears to a somber topic that we wanted to discuss. If you're listening to this on a Monday or in the following week, we are recording this on a Saturday. And on Friday, April 9th, Titan and a giant in hip hop, DMX, passed away after a long struggle with his own personal demons and struggling over the past couple of days with multiple heart attacks and a coma. It's a tough situation, but we wanted to just not dwell on his end, but to take a couple moments to talk about his life and his career and what he meant to us as fans of hip hop. So, Sudge, if you want to just start us off, man, and just talk about our man X, the dog.
X, man. Yo, I remember DMX was really the epitome of to me, the post Biggie rap scene, and the hype and interest around rap music becoming just more and more popular, and just having a lot of fun, with the genre. I remember being, 6, 7 years old and just singing all of DMX's hits. Like he was such a hype force. I remember my brother getting the album Flesh of My Flesh and Blood of My Blood and being so
Yeah.
like taken aback because here's a dude drenched in blood. He was in great shape, and just like looking fierce. And I remember thinking like, whoa, like this dude is edgy, he's cool. And then just singing his hits, whether it was, X Gonna Give It To You, singing Rough Rider anthem, and just like with my schoolmates just running around singing his hits, watching movies like Romeo Must Die and Cradle to the Grave, and just seeing his impact from, just the movie standpoint, and just having fun with him as an entertainer. And him just being such a unique voice, him having such a unique style that wasn't really like anyone else. And, I don't think anybody's going to say, oh, he was the greatest lyricist or the greatest this or the greatest that, but he was an artist that was just entertaining and engaging. And you felt his impact. You felt his spirit, his soul from his music. And that was just something that I could really never forget.
Yeah. X for sure is, you can't say it about so many artists, but DMX is a one of one. There is no other DMX. He would take these crazy, like loud, bombastic beats that would like eat up any other rapper, and he would just like dominate on them. And looking back on his career, I think that a lot of kids that are younger than ourselves, let's say 2021 or younger, they're gonna look at DMX and they're gonna see the hits and probably think that like, oh yeah, he was pretty popular. He had, some good hits, but DMX was a force in the
Yes.
music industry. This we're talking about a man that went platinum twice in the same year and went platinum 3 times over the course of 18 months. His first 5 albums all went number one. So there's people that will argue that DMX at one point was one of the biggest rappers in the game.
Yeah.
I will argue that DMX at one point was the biggest rapper in the game. Bigger than Jay, bigger than Nas, bigger than anybody you want to bring up. DMX was, in terms of sales and in terms of just sheer his amount of fans that he could pull together, was the biggest rapper in the world. And I think both of us can say this as kids growing up in New York. DMX and songs like Rough Riders Anthem flipped New York on its head. Like there's
Yeah.
no, like it's almost like you had to be there to understand like what that song and what DMX meant to the entire state of New York. Like it's almost incomprehensible. And you talked about it earlier. Like he has one of, I would even argue, you could say he had possibly the greatest voice, just pure, straight up voice in hip hop. He has iconic bars, iconic ad libs. Like everybody knows, like the what? Everybody knows the, what y'all really want. Like everybody knows like all of DMX's iconic songs, ad libs. You hear that little for the little lighter clicks for a Rough
Yeah.
Riders anthem. Like you don't even have to hear the beat. Like you know exactly what's about to happen. His bars a lot of times were simple. He could rhyme cat with bat, but it would be some of the hardest bars like you ever
Yeah.
heard in your whole life. And like he had this, outside of just his voice and just hard hitting bars, he had this great juxtaposition between darkness and light. And he was constantly, whether it was personally or actually on his albums and in his music, he was constantly fighting his demons and his darkness, and
Mm.
also intermixing his desire to be closer to God and his religion, like on the same song and sometimes within the same bar. Like DMX would talk about killing and robbing a dude, and then he would pray for him, and then he would bark like within the span of like 6 bars. Like so it was
Yeah.
like, listen to a DMX song is almost like an experience like no other, and I
Yeah.
always appreciated how he was always very transparent. Like he's one of the most transparent rappers in rap history in terms of his honesty, his honesty about what he was going through, and his honesty about what he struggled with in his mind, and actually putting that on music and making that compelling. Like he was, like we said earlier, he is a one of one. There is never going to be another DMX. He wasn't
Yeah.
perfect. He had his demons, he had his struggles, but ultimately he is one of the most unique and impactful artists in hip hop history. So I just want to take, a second to appreciate him in a couple different ways. What's your favorite DMX song?
Oh, hands down. I knew this. X gonna give it to you. X going, yo, bro. I loved X gonna give it to you because it was one of those songs that I enjoyed as a kid, and then as I got older, it just got better. And then so much so to the point that when I was an undergrad, in my fraternity organization, we would do performances. And X Gonna Give It To You was a song that I picked every time we wanted to like really just get the crowd engaged, get the crowd hyped. It's a song that everybody knew, everybody was familiar with, and they knew, and that introduction especially if you listen to like the extended version of the song, it takes like maybe a solid 45 seconds to a minute until he gets into the first verse, and you're just like, like I remember pacing stage and being like, yeah, I'm about to see this performance. You're gonna see me do my thing and see us do our thing. And just that it would always just get me hyped, and it would always just get me going. And it was he was just a force to be reckoned with, like you said, and like I said, with his voice. Any simple thing he said just cut you, like you felt it just penetrated somewhere in your mind and in your heart, and you just really feel him, and I'm going to use present tense because his music and his art is still out today, and you can still experience it. And so that was definitely my favorite song. And yeah, hands down, that I just love that vibe. And I think it was also a part of the soundtrack for Cradle to the Grave, which was a really fun action movie for my 11-year-old self. With Jet Li, kicking butt. It's like that's everything I wanted to see. My favorite rappers in Tim's stomping out bad guys.
The New York dream, definitely, for sure. Yeah, it's gotta be What's My Name for me, man. Like that's just those pianos coming in, like it just sounds so menacing. And then you got D on the track, you think it's a game, you think it's an epic game, and then, like you just gotta like your muscle just automatically like tense up, and like you just start like bobbing your head, and then like the chorus is ill, like you like just watching his videos, like he's in that like gladiator stadium, and you got the dog growling and foaming at the mouth, and he was just like a different kind of dude. And like we talked about it earlier, and I was talking about it with my wife yesterday, and it was like he could say some things sometimes that like any other rapper would say, and it would sound whack, but when DMX said it, like it just sounded like hard. Like on What's My Name, at one point he literally says like, I'm not a nice person. It's just like if any other rapper would have said that, it wouldn't work. But because it's DMX, like he could literally say whatever he wanted on a track, and it's fireworks. It's literal fireworks, man. So outside of the music though, unfortunately it came as a result of his passing, but it is comforting to see all of these people that had a relationship with him, and he has this this kind of everyman appeal in a way, because you're seeing all of these people that have these pictures with him. You see people like that taking pictures with him in like a gas station or like in a convenience store, or like they will be rolling past him and they would like play his music out of the windows of a car, and he would just be like vibing and dancing to it with them and rapping along, like, and he has just this influence as far as where he's touching so many different people. So it's incredibly sad to see how it all ended. But for anybody listening or anybody watching, I just hope we take a couple weeks to celebrate one of the most iconic artists in hip hop history, man, because he definitely deserved it. And I'm glad that he got to get his flowers. I'm glad that he was able to do the verses with Snoop Dogg and actually have another iconic artist celebrate their influence and celebrate their careers together. It was good to see him, he had gained some weight. It looked like he was healthy. It was good to see him in that state, and before all of this happened. But I'll miss D, man. I'll miss the dog. There's never gonna be another him.
Yeah, bottom line. And you said it best. Just continue to remember his legacy, continue to remember the fact that and just be mindful of the fact that we have a lot of brothers and sisters out here who are dealing with substance abuse, who can't get past that demon, and they can't get that monkey off their back. And our hearts and our prayers go out to them. And it doesn't matter how many times you get off the wagon, just fight tooth and nail to get back on it and seek help, seek the resources that you need. Let's continue to abolish the stigmatization of drug abuse and just give people the support and help that they need to get back on the right track. And understand that people are not going to be perfect. They're going to fall, but at least give them the resources and tools and love and support that they need to know that there's somebody there for them, and not just put them in a state of isolation where all they can do is fall back on substance abuse. So yeah, that's my hope and that's my prayer. And just let's just take a moment to remember X.
All right, man. That'll do it for the Put You On Game podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you guys and your support and your listen. And we'll see you next week.
All right, everybody. Peace. Peace and love.